So, welcome to the Marketing Optimist Marketing Sandwich course. We've changed things up a little bit since the event happened. We're doing a lot more webinars than we ever did before, but we seem to be chunking through them really nicely. So today we're going to be talking to Mike Chitty. I've known Mike, wow, a heck of a long time. I've known Mike longer than I've known my wife. So I can't remember where I think we first met through Better Culture. And then since then we've had lots of kind of chats and done little bits and pieces together. And Mike is always full of amazing sage knowledge and great ideas. So I'm more than happy to have Mike on the call. So hello, Mike.
No pressure. Thank you. Yeah, hi. Yeah, good to be here. Yeah, it must be at least 10 years.
If not a bit longer.
Yeah, oh Lord.
If not a bit longer, maybe kind of, because I think we met each other kind of through the early, it's going to sound really, really geeky and crap, but through the early Twitter days in Leeds, when it was all a bit Wild West and you could do lots of stuff on Twitter, and there were lots of people properly meeting, and there was a proper community on it.
Yeah, a tweet up was a special thing. Down at the Adelphi, I seem to remember we'd drink lots of beer, which was much more fun than just tweeting. Yeah.
Yeah, people would come in with strange bits of technology you've never seen before. Go, what's that? And we'd all kind of huddle around and see what we could do with it. But that's how I know Mike. So, so Mike, could you just tell everyone a little bit about yourself and what you do?
Yeah. Well, what I do, what I used to do was do lots of leadership and strategy advice, strategic advice to a range of mainly large organizations, large corporates, a lot of stuff in the NHS, some private sector work, some third sector work, but it was all that stuff about strategy and leadership, which for me is really about how do you become the kind of organization or the kind of person that you want to become. So, strategy and leadership, but it's really just development into it. So that's what I do. And really thinking quite hard about how you do that in a way that is helpful rather than harmful, which sounds like it should be really easy, but actually it's really difficult. There's a lot of bad help out there, I think. So trying to offer good help, helpful help, it's counterintuitive really. And that's a little bit about what I'm going to talk about today. Okay.
So what's your take on how things are at the moment, and what are your thoughts for people kind of trying to run a business and survive through all these really ridiculously uncertain times?
Oh, crikey. That's a really good question. I don't know that I suppose one of the first rules would be to not offer advice where you don't know that your advice is going to work. Because if you offer advice and tell people what you think they should do, and then they do and it doesn't work out, they tend to kind of blame you a little bit and say, what does he know? And it's interesting. People are saying, oh, we've never had a pandemic like this. But I mean, AIDS killed 150 million worldwide, and that was in my lifetime. 1968, there was another pandemic that killed like 50 million worldwide. That was in my lifetime. Malaria kills millions. This is not that unusual an event if you look at it with a kind of a global perspective. It's just that it's affecting us in a much more direct and personal way. And that's created a set of conditions that I don't really know what I would advise a generic business person to do, other than to keep, I suppose, their ears open, their mind open, and their heart open, and kind of notice a bit of what's happening. We were talking a bit in the chit chat that you can edit out, Rich, about some people that I know that are really recognizing that this period has taught them about what really matters in a way that they've kind of been in denial about before. So having a bit of time to spend at home with the kids or the dogs or the partner, whatever it may be, or by the pool, they suddenly realize that this is a much more pleasant way to live life than, jumping on the train to London 3 times a week. Yeah. Or so I suppose that would be my one bit of advice, would be to really kind of treat this as a bit of a poisoned gift, but a gift nonetheless, to really kind of reappraise and take stock and think about whether you want to go back to normal or forward to a new normal. Because I think although these pandemics happen quite regularly, this one has been teed up in such a way as to give us time and space to stop and think.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's changing. Well, just everything. I mean, we've from a marketing point of view, we've seen our clients and we've helped them do this. We've helped them effectively rip up all their plans and start again, just overnight.
Yeah.
In some cases, a complete 360 swap round from what they were doing before. We've got
Yeah.
one client who was doing DSE assessments, where you kind of come and assess people's workspaces and where they are in the office, and flip it right round to be doing delivering yoga classes via Zoom.
Yeah.
Overnight. We've done that. We've helped them turn.
I suppose I've never been a big fan of the plan anyway. You know, one of my leadership gurus is a chap called Mike Tyson, who some of you might know as a professional boxer and a little bit of an interesting character. And he says the trouble with every boxer has a plan, and the plan lasts until I punch him on the nose. You know, like the plan just doesn't survive reality, does it? And they never do. But again, that's another thing that a lot of us do, is we live in denial and we believe that our plan's all right and we control the variances and we really are masters of our universe or mistresses of our universe, and we will get the world to conform to our plan. I'm a big fan of planning and the process of thinking about the future we're trying to create and then how we act to get there. But most plans were never worth the paper they were written on. So I'd definitely encourage them not to write the next plan, but just to feel their way into the future, you know, to experiment their way into the future and to think their way into the future.
Yeah.
I think that's much more helpful than trying to plan your way into the future. There are a few conditions where maybe we can have a tentative plan, but they really don't work for many of us.
Yeah, we find it's the best idea is to have a set of plans. So plan A, B, C, D.
All right.
And hopefully they're pointing in the same kind of general direction.
Yeah.
But things change. I mean, this is just a massive highlight that things just change ridiculously quickly.
Yeah.
And this has brought a lot of technology and a lot of things that people were putting off right to the fore. I mean, most people weren't working from home. Most people weren't using video conferencing.
You know, the orthodoxy says we should all have a marketing plan, and I suppose that's how you make your living, isn't it? So I'll be a bit careful about being too dismissive of plans. But I think if you've got to have half a dozen plans, what each of them is really is a hypothesis.
Yeah.
It's a hypothesis that you're testing. And the hypothesis might work for a while, but if it starts to not work or doesn't work at all in the first place, you need to jump to another hypothesis. So I think, you know, that idea that what we're dealing with is a set of hypotheses when we plan. You know, it's not a plan like an architect has a plan for a house. When they develop a plan for a house, they can be pretty sure it's going to work. When we develop a plan for a business, there are so many more complex social factors at play that at best it's a hypothesis, and we're best to hold it gently, because even if it stays true for a while, it probably won't stay true forever. So we need to change the hypothesis. So it's a very different way of being in the world, really, as someone that holds a hypothesis loosely rather than someone that has a plan that they're going to bloody manage, whether it kills them or not. So yeah, it's funny, you know, I do a lot of work in the NHS where they've got a 10-year plan. And it's really just a hypothesis for what the next 10 years might look like that hasn't survived the first 3 months, really. You know, coronavirus has come along and said, oh, all that money you spent developing that 10-year plan, forget about it.
Can I just add in, they were saying that the government had a really good pandemic plan and it was rated internationally as really well prepared. And then, great plan, but like...
Yeah, well, so I think they did have a good plan, Tim, and that plan sat on the pandemic planning shelf. And it's funny, I did a load of work with a bunch of people who did emergency planning and preparedness for the NHS, and they do have some incredible plans, but the plan assumes that there's going to be enough people to deliver the plan. And parallel to the pandemic plan and the emergency plan was a plan to develop efficiency and improvement, which meant that we went from running our hospitals at something like 85% capacity. So 15%, you know, could be training, learning, resting, doing stuff, to something like 96, 98% capacity. And indeed, some hospitals run at over 100% capacity. You know, when we've got hospital corridor beds. Now, you know, if you've got a system that's running 100% capacity and then demand steps off the curve, you can pull your plan off the shelf, but there's no bugger to implement it.
Yeah.
So they did have a brilliant plan. It just didn't survive the first Mike Tyson punch, you know. And it's funny, people will kind of agree that that's right and a decent analysis, but then they make their living out of doing the plan. So, you know, we'll go back to doing another plan probably, rather than really learn about how we might have a more agile way of stepping into the future.
And I think also from people from people like that kind of level, they have a different set of conflicting plans. So exactly like you said, okay, we've got a pandemic plan, but actually our efficiency plan has cobbled all that. and our other plan has just meant that doesn't work, and there's no cohesive way of sticking them all together.
You know, the plan really has been to try and live within our budgets and kill as few people as possible each quarter. That's really been the plan. If you look at what's actually been happening in a lot of NHS organisations, it's this thing called the control total. The amount of money that we're allowed to spend in total needs to stay below a certain limit. Otherwise, we get rung up by the Secretary of State for Health saying what the hell's going wrong, you know. And so we try and manage that control total and then create as much health or as little death as possible. And that's the plan, really. You know, that's actually what's going on, I would say. That'll probably lose me a few more clients. But hey, you got to speak your truth, haven't you?
Absolutely.
You know, it's funny in terms of the good help and the bad help thing. You know, I think good help, which often does lose you clients because it's not about colluding with them. It creates independence in the client. It doesn't make them dependent on you. And I think, you know, when we talk about helping, that's one of the very first things to think about. Does the help I'm offering allow this client to actually step away from our relationship and be able to do their stuff on their own? Or am I creating dependence on me? And, you know, I think most of the time where you create dependence, that's actually about bad help. And then the second criteria I use is to say, well, if I help here and I get it right, am I getting more necessary and becoming stuff into the world? Am I helping someone put good stuff out there? And by good, you know, the criteria for that might need a bit of kicking around, but basically things that's going to make people happy and keep the planet going. If you're going to do that, then it's good help. If what you're doing is spreading unnecessary stuff and ugly stuff, so, you know, microplastics into the oceans and evil and ill health into people's lungs, then you know, that's bad help too. And then I think the third thing is about good help is if your help creates power with your client. So, you know, you're working in partnership with them, whereas bad help gives you power over your client. And I think that's the third distinction that I often use when I'm thinking about how I work with clients. And, you know, sometimes it's very tempting to give bad help because you can get paid for it easily. So, you know, you don't speak the truth to your client about what they're actually doing. You just go along with the plan.
Yeah, and it's a tricky position to be in because from a business owner's point of view and somebody who we deliver plans, people want plans from us. You kind of, it's tricky to get to that position where you want to kind of be able to let them go free on their own and go, like, we've given you all the help we can give you now, and off you go and fly, spread your wings and fly. Because then from a service provider's point of view, you end up going, okay, so we've let them go. Why have we let a client go? Why are they not ultra reliant on us? Why are they not more reliant on us? And that's an interesting dichotomy, especially at the moment, especially when it comes to being able to add more value. Because at the moment, people are obviously really cautious of their budgets if they've got them. Really cautious of investing in something new or taking on something new or looking further than the next day at the moment, because the times are changing so quickly. So it's difficult. It's a difficult position to be in, to kind of want to be able to let the clients fly.
Yeah, yeah, it is, and I think it's one of the counterintuitive things. If you work with a client with the view of making yourself redundant, as they learn new things, you learn new things too, and they often will still need you. I mean, most of my clients I've had for 10, 15 years. I'm not doing anything like the work I'm doing now that I was doing 10 years ago, because my business has changed and their business has changed. So the mindset is always to help them learn what it is that you're helping them do at the time. But as the relationship deepens, you're learning new things, they're learning new things. So often the relationship perpetuates. Now, the opposite side of that is to say, listen, here's what we do, and we will do this forever for you. You don't need to learn it, just become dependent upon us. When you become stagnant, they become stagnant. They look to reduce the costs of what they're spending with you year on year because you're not bringing anything new. You get into this very stagnant relationship. So I think this kind of mutuality of growth, and really what you're getting rather than independence is a kind of interdependence. You work hand in hand with them, and you grow with them, and you change with them. And I think that's probably one of the differences.
Okay, yeah, that's interesting. Because I guess Tim, for you, that must be kind of your. That's kind of how you, I mean, unless I'm misunderstanding, that's how a lot of your business works, isn't it? Because you train people to go to the bar, to get their qualifications, and then you have kind of let them go, haven't you? Once they've got that.
I guess there are two things in terms of when I developed the niche in terms of helping them become judges. When I managed the barristers' chambers, it was counterintuitive, because as soon as the talented people left became judges, we lost their income, and that's what ran chambers. But I always saw it as that it was, as individuals, how do they want to develop? And if someone wants to leave, I should do everything I can to help them leave. So it came back to when I had a member of staff who was a great clerk. She wanted to go and join the police, and I said, how can I help you with your application? I don't want to lose you, but of course I'll help you. Come to me, I'll help you with your application. I'll do your reference, what you need. And she went and joined the police. And it was against the organisation's aims, or in theory, best interests, but actually it created a culture where people felt valued and there was trust. Mm-hmm. So it's the sort of thing that Mike's touching on. And it sort of, although it wasn't in my interest, and at one stage when I got 3 people appointed circuit judges within 25 hours, we lost a load of income to the chambers, and it was bad news for us financially, but it was the right thing to do.
I was going to say, in the short term, it's a problem, Tim. In the long term, you get the reputation for people that respect things like freedom and self-determination and right to choose, and that you don't lure people into some sort of honey trap where they, might stay with you for 15 years, but then they hit a massive existential crisis. So I think this thing about whether you're managing the relationship for the short term or the long term, and in marketing terms, whether you're about brand development in the long term or the short term is really critical. And quite often you have to do the wrong thing in the short term to build that longer term relationship. And the judgment and the wisdom to do that, I think, is really difficult, and comes down to your values, really. If you believe that people should be self-determining rather than reliant on you, then you have to take that short-term hit sometimes.
The pressure, though, is when you're under that financial pressure reality, and then you're like, shit, how are we going to afford to do this? How can we carry on trading with this? And I think often it's that fear of the financial consequences that means that people don't act in that way.
And especially for small businesses, where actually, you lose one big client, you're in real trouble. Or for big businesses, where what they do is look at individual performance rather than collective performance. So again, some of the big businesses I work with, will try and make sure that each individual's income stays steady and increasing. Whereas actually what we should recognize is that sometimes, individuals will have a great month or a great year, and sometimes they have a lousy month or a lousy year. And actually the reason for having a large organization is to allow humans to be human. Not to be these robots that are knocking out consistent levels of income generation, really. So again, I think this thing about being human in our work rather than being driven by the Excel spreadsheet is really important, and recognizing that you're going to get punched on the nose. That's all right. How do we come back from that? What's the next plan? What's the next hypothesis? What's the next thing we do? Because otherwise, God, you get a really dull business, don't you? Just grinding out the work.
Yeah. And that's one of the exciting things. One of the reasons I love running the Marketing Optimist and the business we do is because it and Sophie will tell you, it changes daily, hourly sometimes. Because it's just like, oh, that's happened, or this new opportunity has arisen, or quickly change to this or that. That's the fun of the chase. And I'm actually, in a weird way, now once I've got used to this new situation, or I'm getting more used to the situation, I'm not going to get used to it. It actually feels a little bit like it did at the beginning of the business when I was more a startup, and the more kind of you're chasing and you're having to think on your feet. Although it was manic before, this thinking on my feet, I actually get a buzz out of this kind of quick movement.
And Rich, there's a lot of evidence. If you look at really high performing organizations and systems, they don't perform highly because they follow a plan. They perform highly because they step away from the plan. They recognize, oh, here's something that's happened that we didn't plan for, but blimey, we're going to put some resources into that and take something else out of the plan. And high performance comes when it's not about abandoning the plan, but it's about recognizing that the plan was a hypothesis, and that hypothesis needs to shift. And that we didn't know enough when we did the plan. So that notion of staying alive and feeling agile and feeling responsive, once you start to lose that, you need to really step back and reflect, because you're starting to not have a business that you want anymore, you know, a business that's just turning the handle on the machine. It's interesting as well. I was going to talk a little bit about these four ways in which I try and help. And I think we've just demonstrated the first one there, really, which is by creating the conditions in which people can start to talk about their experience. You know, and you started to talk about what it was like when you started the business, and then what it become like, which sounded not quite as much fun. And it was back to being fun again now. And that first helper style is what I call being acceptant. Just creating the conditions where people can start to feel free to talk about stuff. And you listen without judgment and without analysis, and you're not trying to fix them or cure them or be clever with them. You're just letting them talk. And, you know, the most helpful kind of help is where people hear themselves saying things, and then they think, yeah, I must make sure I keep my business alive like that and keep it fresh and not let it get stale again. You know, I don't need to do anything. You've helped yourself there. And when you look at this acceptance style of just creating the safe space for people to talk and to share and disclose, you know, the research is that although you as a helper feel pretty useless because you're not being clever, you're not giving them advice and guidance and models, they're being honest with themselves, they're being honest with you, and they find their own help. They find their own way forward. And that's the ultimate way of helping keep clients independent, really. So that I try and spend as much time as I can in that acceptant mode where I'm just sitting there nodding and going, oh, really? How interesting. And people are starting to talk and open up more. And, you know, occasionally I might say something like, oh, that sounds tough, or that sounds exciting. And I go, yeah, it's tough, or it is exciting. And, you know, they start to feel their own way forward. And when I look at what a lot of helpers do, they don't do much of that at all. They might do a little bit at the beginning of a relationship to build a bit of empathy and rapport. But then once they've got sufficient empathy and rapport, they leave the listening to one side and they start to try and diagnose and prescribe. And they're way less effective forms of helping. Does that make any sense?
Yeah, it does. I think it's so reflecting that back to kind of how we work sometimes. It's obviously at the early stage you sit and you listen and we absorb and we find out what the problem, what the pain points are, and then you'd have to give some advice. But it's almost that thing of if you sit there and you're almost like or you're in your own mind you're being too passive. It's almost like, oh, I've not done anything yet. All I've done is kind of go, that's exciting, and the thought is that they're gonna go, well, they're not. I'm paying for some kind of advice and there's nothing coming yet. They're just kind of parroting they're just reflecting back what I've said.
But I've done loads of that work, Rich, where you know, you work with clients and their helpers, and you know, I'll be training the helpers for a bit, and I'll get them to work with the client. Say, look, you can only be acceptant here. No advice, no diagnosis. When you're listening, you're not listening to understand or find the pain points. You're just trying to make it okay for them to talk about the pain that they feel in their business. And the experts hate doing that. They have to rein in their ego, they have to rein in their knowledge, and they just have to be fully human with this other person and listen to what it's like for them to be them. Now, when you then get the client to rate how effectiveness that help was, they will typically rate that way, way higher than any of the other three helping styles that I'm going to offer you in a bit. And it's one of the things we have to recognize is that sometimes the most helpful thing we can do is just create the space in which they can heal themselves, in which they can talk about pain that they've never talked about. They can talk about what they love about marketing or hate about marketing, or, you know, and the words as they say them and as they hear themselves saying them unleash this human potential for sort of self-correction that if we're not careful, we crush because we come in too early with our advice. And I agree, sometimes you do need to give advice. But I think the circumstances for that are probably far more limited than most of us think.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I was talking to a friend who's a consultant psychiatrist and psychotherapist during the week, and he's retiring in July, but he's got so much wisdom. But with some of his clients, he actually will sit there silently for an hour.
Yeah.
And it's like, oh, you know, and he's just desperate to, like, you know, apply all his wisdom and stuff. Yeah,
it's exactly. I mean, this is where a lot of this came from. I studied a guy called Carl Rogers, who was a psychotherapist, and he used to think that the way he helped was by understanding, you know, what was wrong in the brain of a murderer or a rapist. These are the kind of people you work with, and then how do I fix their brains? How do I fix their mental patterns? Tried that for years, got nowhere. Once he realized that what he needed to do was accept them as human beings and let them talk about their life and create a space where they could talk about what had formed them, what had shaped them, he suddenly started finding that a lot of his clients could start to heal themselves. And so this comes from a very psychotherapeutic sort of relationship where you just have to stop judging people and you have to stop looking for their pain points and looking for what's wrong with them. You just have to let them be. And then once they can start to be, they can start to become and be different and start to change. But most people are so used to being judged and browbeaten and told by experts what to do that actually they do the opposite. They shrink down, and it's difficult. So being acceptant is often just enough, and being acceptant for an hour and then sending off a bill for 500 quid, quite often it'll get paid. It's brilliant, honestly, it really is. The next mode that I have, so sometimes I'll sit there and I'll be acceptant, and someone literally pours their heart and their guts and their brain out to me, and there's an awful lot of mess there on the table, and it's funny, I sometimes call the acceptance phase the throwing up phase. How do I get them to throw it all up? And I often think when I'm sitting there listening, I think it's a bit like when you watch a cat trying to get up a fur ball. It's like you help your client, you go, whoop, and here's another thing, here's another thing, here's another thing, and they throw this stuff up on the table. And I might quite often say things like, there's a lot of stuff come out there, but it seems to fall into three areas. There's some stuff about money, there's some stuff about customers, and there's some stuff about technology. And I'll do this thing where I locate it, money, customers, technology. And then I'll just look and I'll say, what do you want to talk about first? And they say, well, mainly it's customers, Mike. And so that's the catalytic style, where having them thrown all this mess onto the table, I'll kind of offer 3 different piles or 4 different piles and say, where do you want to start? And what you're starting to do there is to offer a bit of structure, helping them to see the wood for the trees. Yeah, there are 3 broad themes that I need to deal with. Or maybe, there are those 3 broad themes, Mike, but there's also a 4th I've not told you about. So the structure helps them get a bit clearer. Sometimes I'll introduce a model. So I might say, well, if you want to talk about money, let's understand how a cash flow works, or, bring in a model or a theory. But this thing of giving them the power to think about what matters most and where they want to start becomes really important. So that catalytic way of working, where you introduce a model or a theory. And I'm guessing you'll have loads of marketing models or theories, loads of journeys, lots of customer touch point expressions that you can bring to the table, and it'll help them make sense of their mess. So I think that catalytic way of working, bringing a bit of structure and a framework is often helpful. But how hard is that? You just read a few books, don't you? Learn a few models. And then when the client starts to share about their world, you match a model that might match their world. And again, I think one of the things that I was taught a long time ago was to, when you think you're ready to put your model on the table, actually just leave it in your briefcase a little bit longer, dig a little bit further. And only when you're absolutely sure that what you're going to pull out your bag is going to make them go, wow, yeah, that's helpful.
Yeah.
That's really helpful. So keep it tucked away for as long as possible until you're certain that what you're producing is going to be wonderful for them. Don't bring your models and your theories out too early until you really know you've got the right one for the client. That makes sense?
Absolutely, yeah, that's really useful.
So acceptance, spend a lot of time on that. And again, I'll be thinking, if I've got an hour with a client, let's spend kind of half an hour just getting them to cough up the fur balls. Then let's spend maybe 5 or 10 minutes exploring some models and doing this sort of theoretical shaping stuff. And then sometimes what I normally have to do at some point in a meeting is go to style 3, which is confrontational. Now, this is where I become Mike Tyson that punches them on the nose. It doesn't normally have to be that unkind. I try and do it kindly and powerfully. But you kind of have to name a gap between what the client is talking about and what they're actually doing. So it might sound something like, Ms. Client, you want a world-class marketing operation, and yet you're prepared to invest 150 quid a year in it. I don't think you're going to get a world-class marketing operation for 150 quid a year, or even 150 quid a month. And you have to really look them in the eyes, and you have to really, I often think that I'm hitting them around the head with a cold fish. Here is the truth. If you want world-class marketing, you need to invest more time and more money than that. Stop, pause. And, hitting them really hard. And then normally after that, I go straight back to acceptance. And I'll say something like, I'm sure that isn't what you wanted to hear. How do you feel? And they'll normally say something like, I know you're right, mate. I know you're true. I know this is the truth. If I want a decent marketing operation, it's not so much about finding the right marketer. I've got to put a note on my budgets, or I need to go to the bank manager and persuade them that our investment's worthwhile. Yeah. So this confrontation, and quite often it's about a gap between what they're saying and what they're doing. So, you know, they might, like Rich, you said you like it, that it feels like it's a startup again. Well, if you really like that startup feel, keep it like a startup, keep it fresh. Don't ever let it stabilize again. And if in your conversations with me, you start to say, I really want to stabilize things again, I'll say, well, why? You enjoy it when it's a little bit exciting, you know. So which do you want, Rich? Do you want excitement, or do you want dull, routine monotony and you know, a consistently growing bank balance? Which of these do you want? And, you know, can you have both of them a bit? So this ability to confront the client, and but you've got to make sure the relationship's strong enough that when you hit them around the head with just the truth that they're not seeing, that they don't sack you. It's always a bit risky, the confrontation. And then straight back to acceptance, you know, that. And again, I quite often say that must have been hard to hear. How do you feel? And normally it's a good thing. If you do it with enough skill and with enough compassion and kindness, rather than just being a bastard, you know, it works. And then style 4, which is the one that most of us love to do, is where we can get to be prescriptive. And you say, listen, I'm the expert here. I've understood your pain, understand the points of pain. I've got a strategy. I've got a plan. I want you to spend 1,500 quid a month with me for the next 12 months, and we'll double your turnover, or whatever it might be that you say. And you know, you hold your body differently. You become the expert rather than the compassionate listener. And you say, this is what you need to do, and you will be successful, and we will be happy together, and we'll have a great business relationship. I think this needs to be the smallest part of the time that you spend with your clients. It needs to be the style that you only go to when you really have to either close the deal or to stop them from doing something that's going to put themselves out of business. So I think it's quite a rare case that you need to go to it, because otherwise they'll just keep finding their own way forward, and you keep sending them the bill for the catalysis and the facilitation and the being lovely. Once you start prescribing, you need to be prepared to lose that client, because if they take your prescription, they take your medicine, and it doesn't work, or it works less well than you promised, there's only one person they're going to blame, and that's you. And so they'll sack you and move on. The other 3 modes, the only person they're going to blame is themselves, because they're doing their prescribing, they're doing their analysis, they're doing their action planning. You're just walking side by side with them. And if it goes wrong, you know, they can't pin the blame on you, because you never told them what to do. You just help them back their own judgment. And then you can help them learn when their own judgment goes wrong. And, you know, you can do that really clever facilitation piece. Now, again, if you know, often when I'm training helpers, I'll do this exercise that says, well, okay, now I want you to spend an hour with your client, and I want you to listen to their pain points. And then I want you to diagnose and prescribe your expert intervention that's going to help them. And they'll do that for an hour or however long it takes. And at the end of it, I'll ask the client to rate how effective that help was. And 9 times out of 10, they'll say, well, they never really understood me. You know, I can see why they've diagnosed this, but that's not what I want to be doing. And so they'll often rate this kind of help as being the least helpful help. Although for us as the helpers, it's where we feel, you know, I've brought my MBA to bear, I've brought my expertise to bear, but you know, you're offering them a pill that they really don't want to take. Now, if you generally are the doctor, you know, the GP that can diagnose and prescribe and say, take this pill and you'll be better, if they've got that relationship with you, they'll take the pill. But in most of our fields of work, it's not as neat and as easy as getting the diagnosis right and prescribing the pill. It's a much messier human process.
Yeah, absolutely.
And that's the bit where the first 3 styles help.
What's your second? What do you call your second style, Mike?
Catalytic. I call it catalytic. I'm trying to catalyze their client's understanding. I'm trying to offer them a model or a theory, just something that's going to help them move through the mess a bit quicker. So acceptant is the furball throwing up, catalytic, confrontational, which is short and sharp, back to acceptant. And then if I have to, I'll turn all expert and say, here's what I think you should do. But, you know, to me, that's the riskiest and the least helpful form. And I often think of it as like changing gears. I try and stay out of 4th gear because I get speeding tickets when I go into 4th gear. If I stay diddling about in 1st, 2nd, and 3rd, I'm safe, the client's safe, we're not going to have any crashes, and we might actually really enjoy the journey, you know? We might actually really connect. So, yeah, but I will think, oh, I need to change gear now. I need to try confrontation, or I need to come back to acceptance, or I need to go into catalysis. And, I'll try and engineer those gear changes in the conversation and keep it all completely, keep the technique off the table, actually. If it goes well, the client doesn't know what I'm doing.
Yeah.
And I send them the invoice and they pay it because they're happy with the result, but they don't quite know what I've done. And sometimes I don't know what I've done either, to be honest, because it's not always conscious. Sometimes it just happens. I
guess if they feel happy and they feel they've progressed, then it doesn't really matter what you did. Do you know what I mean? They feel they got the value out of that, and they push forward with whatever they decided they were going to do. Yeah, and sometimes psychotherapists can say nothing for an hour, except for, we've got 10 minutes left. Is there anything you'd like to say? They normally manage the boundary of the hour quite well. Yeah. And sometimes the client will say something, sometimes they won't. And sometimes the client still pays the bill, because actually that hour where they were just held as a human being to sit with their own feelings and say nothing can be really helpful. I mean, I haven't got the courage to do that. I'll normally, after a bit of silence, say, is there anything else that you think or feel or want to say? Or another thing I'll do to try and jolt it with a little bit of a confrontation is to say, well, what's the one thing you really don't want us to talk about? That's another really good way to get them to go, oh, I don't want to talk about the reasons I had to sack my last marketing consultant, or, I don't want to talk about that. But actually, that's potentially the most valuable conversation. Yeah, and again, by asking them what they don't want to talk about, they have to think about that and think about why I don't want to talk about it. And if I did talk about it, would it be helpful? And maybe not in that conversation, but maybe in a conversation in a month or two's time, they say, I think I ought to tell you about what happened with the last consultant, Rich. Yeah. Yeah. They gave me a prescription that I took and it all went wrong. So I sacked them. And then you can go, all right, well, I'm not prescribing those pills anymore. Yeah, try a different method. Yeah. And there's one other thing that I have to watch out for. Sometimes prescription's really clear. Diagnose, prescribe. Quite often, a lot of what we're doing is a kind of a veiled prescription. So in some ways, what I've been talking about here is a veiled prescription to you guys to say, look, think about being acceptant, being catalytic, being confrontational, and being prescriptive. In some ways here in this scenario, I'm doing exactly the thing that I'm saying you shouldn't do, which is offer a veiled prescription, a suggestion about what you ought to do. But at least I'm being open about it. And you don't have to take it. You can go back to whatever helping model you like. I learned this, though, I was thinking about it this morning. I learned this 30 years ago from British Gas, who were training some of their own teams in internal consultancy skills, because they were having problems that no one was listening to their own internal experts, because the internal experts were going in and looking over the glasses and saying, this is what you need to be doing. And everyone was going, up yours. So they started to work on this model that says, how do we learn how to really help? And ironically, it was by keeping our expertise away from the client for as long as possible until we were really sure they were ready for it.
That's interesting. Years again, managing the barristers' chambers years ago, we had training weekends, and they used to do legal stuff in the morning and then a general session in the afternoon. And I wanted to, because they're all individual business owners in effect, I wanted to do some stuff in marketing and client relationship and all that sort of stuff. And I knew what I wanted to say to them, but they knew me, so they wouldn't come in. So I actually got an actor to come up, and I fed him what I wanted to tell him and ran some groups, and then got me to stand up. And I just said, throw as many bullshit, blue sky thinking type things as you can into it. And he starts to do his talk, and I got people going, bloody hell, this is complete bullshit and crap. But then they all bought into it and got into it. And at the end I said, I'd really like to thank Kevin for coming up. Yeah, he's actually an actor. Yeah, but I think he's done a great job today. Just work on that learning. And they wouldn't have heard it from me. They wouldn't have taken it from me. Yeah. And it actually, but it worked. Yeah. And I think it's that internal where you don't, that's the whole thing about being a consultant or advisor. I define something, it's normally someone who lives more than 10 miles from you. Because actually they do. They're just like, yeah.
It's really interesting. I mean, I work all over the UK, and I used to do a lot of work internationally. I've decided not to do so much of that moving forward. But, in other people's lands, you're a prophet. If I try and talk about some of this stuff with some of the senior leaders in my own city, they look at you as if you're bonkers because you're just some citizen with an axe to grind. It's really, really hard to work in your own communities. But I think as well, that thing about, so confrontation for me is often the most powerful thing. When you confront someone with their own disconnect between what they're saying and what they're doing, that's the most powerful bit. You can only be powerful there when you've got a really strong relationship, you know, with people that really respect you and value you, and you respect and value them. You can confront them about some really difficult stuff and it'd be helpful. With people that just see you as a hired hand, you confront them with anything that they're not happy to be confronted with, and they're going to sack you. So this notion of how you build a strong enough relationship, a container that can contain some real powerful truths, is again something that I try and do over time with this relationship with clients.
In my funny niche, because I'm only literally doing bite-sized chunks of work with people, particularly say on interviewing, I've got to establish a rapport mainly online with someone, and I'll do a mock interview with them, and I've got to, again, just give them, sorry, that was crap. Yeah?
Yeah.
And then I've got to go in, really, so give that immediate feedback, like confrontational. Here's how you could do it. Here's an idea. What's your story? And I'm coaching them on that. And I think what's worked for me is because I underpin it, like in the end, pay what you think's fair.
Yeah.
Well, here's my hourly rate. But look, let's not worry about it. What do you need? Now here's this. I'm sorry, that was crap, wasn't it? And then there was someone else who's got his actual interviews now for a high court judge in London. And they're doing it via Zoom. And the other day, he had answers, but they always answered the question before. So I sent him the 2 Ronnie sketch about the mastermind. Yeah, to look at this. Great answer, but that was the question I asked 2 ago. Yeah. And he's like, and it's about practicing it with family, friends. But I have to condense that into a short period of time to make sure I add value and build trust. But I can't faff around with the...
I mean, it's interesting. So if what you're trying to do is teach technique and teach a set of skills that can be acquired relatively quickly, then absolutely go in and be the expert. If what you're trying to do is help a client with a complex problem in a dynamic marketplace, like developing a marketing strategy, so you're right. You know, there are certain situations. I was working with a vocal coach down at Leeds College of Music, and basically all these kids would sign up to do a 3-year music degree. And a lot of them wanted to be singers and, you know, wanted to be rock stars and that sort of stuff, or opera singers, whatever it may be. And he was one of the world's leading voice coaches, worked down there. And he would listen to someone sing, and within sort of 15 minutes, he'd say things like, "You are wasting your time. You will never be good enough to be a professional singer." And with other people, he'd say within 15 minutes, "You have something in your voice, work with me for 3 years, and you've got a small chance of being someone," you know. But he would know that within 15, 20 minutes because of the biology and the physiology and, you know, have I got what I need to work with here? Now, what was really, really upsetting for the college was that he'd be brutally honest and probably right with his students who, having just coughed up $9,000 for a year of tuition, would suddenly have to go home to mummy or daddy and say, "Do you know that $9,000? My voice coach says it's a complete waste because I'll never be a decent singer." And, you know, we had this then ethical dilemma thing of saying, well, do I just give them my truth about the kit that they've been born with and whether it's going to be any good or not? Or do I screw the $9,000 out this year and the next year and the next year, keep the college going? And again, what's really interesting there is, well, do you want to be an excellent music school where the truth has to come quickly? Or do you actually want to be this thing that just keeps churning out the money and, you know, keeps telling kids if they keep working hard enough, they might get lucky enough? And of course, there's always a chance they'll do a Bob Dylan, you know, not have a great voice, but have enough poetry and enough skill to manage the limited voice they've got to have a brilliant career. So
sorry to, I'm
careful with prescription.
I'm going to have to butt in. I'm going to have to kind of go, we've kind of run out of time, I'm afraid. We've had a really good chat, and I know it's wandered on and on, but I'm going to have to call it a day because I've actually got another call straight after this one.
I've not had my sandwich yet, Rich.
No, sorry. Well, you must be starving. I know I am. I haven't had my sandwich either.
Listen, I've really enjoyed it.
Yeah, well, thank you so much. Thank you,
Pleasure.
Mike. You're always good, and I'm sure we could have carried on chatting all afternoon if we got the time. But unfortunately, I'm gonna have to cut it. I'm gonna have to cut it there.
I normally do that model over 4 days. 4 days training. Yeah.
Well, you've crammed it into an hour, so we've done really well. So thank you very much, Mike. I really appreciate it. We've got a load more. We've got a few more webinars coming up next week. We've got one on Monday, which is on sales, which is very interesting at this point. People are frightened to death of doing sales at the moment. And then we've got the last one is on Friday, which is about mindset. So we've got a couple more webinars. So if anyone's interested, if you'd like to share and tell your friends, that would be great. Once I've edited all this, it's going to go up on YouTube. It'll go on the website. It'll go around on social media. So feel free to share.
Brilliant. Nice to see you all.
Lovely.
Take care, Tim.
Thanks
See
a
you
lot.
both.
Cheers. See you guys.
Bye.
Bye.